Richie Sambora, David Bryan, Tico Torres and I, Jon Bon Jovi, have been creating songs that fill stadiums all over the world for 40 years. We've turned our band into a rock and roll legend. But then, why were we on the verge of not recording more than 2 albums? Why did our guitarist and bass player leave us? Why did I go into depression? Why was my hair more important than my songs? Why is it so hard to be the president of a family business that you all call Bon Jovi?
Welcome to Trembol Podcast, the place for music stories that thrill.
Chapter 1. Jon Bon Jovi's Childhood. Hi, I'm Jon Bon Jovi, although my real name is John Francis Bongiovi, Jr., because my father has the same name as me. I was born on March 2nd, 1962, in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. My parents were both former Marines. On one side was my father, John Francis Bongiovi Sr., who became a barber after leaving the Navy. On the other side, my mother, Carol Sharkey, who would become a florist, although both had had their aspirations in show business. I had a brother, 4 years younger, Anthony Bongiovi, and another who would be born 13 years later than me, Matt Bongiovi. My father was of Italian descent, which is why my last name is spelled Bongiovi, because it comes from Sicily.
Mamma mia!
I grew up in New Jersey, although I spent summers in Pennsylvania with my grandparents, selling newspapers to earn a few coins. From a very young age, I had a very clear desire to be in the world of music. I'll tell you about it. My mother, Carol, who was one of the first Playboy bunnies. When the Beatles arrived in the United States, she became a Beatlemaniac, insisting that I should dedicate myself to music. In fact, she bought me my first guitar and got me into lessons. I was 7 years old and all that music theory stuff seemed like a lot of bullshit, so I threw the guitar in the basement and quit the lessons. I wouldn't really start playing until 1975 when I turned 13. By that time, I'd been listening to music all the time, and I got the bug again, so I took up guitar lessons again, this time with a neighbor who was a great teacher, and I also started playing the piano. From there to my first band, Ray's, there was only one step. Singing came a little later, around the age of 15. I remember that my first concerts were at parties and school dances, but they were always full. In high school, I was known as the guy with the sunglasses because I went to class with them every day. I wasn't trying to be cool. I was trying to play every night at clubs in New Jersey like the Stone Pony, made famous by my friend Bruce Springsteen. It would end super late, and I had a hard time opening my eyes in the morning. It was clear to me that school wasn't for me, so soon after that, I told my parents that I was going to quit school altogether because I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a rock star. My parents have always been completely supportive, and this time it was no different. They just said, "Go for it." So, along with a friend I had met when I was 16 named David Bryan, who would be the future keyboard player for Bon Jovi, we formed a band in 1979 called Atlantic City Expressway. We were a big band of 10 members. David, whose full name is David Bryan Rashbaum, was born the same year as I was, in 1962, on February 7th in New Jersey. His father, Eddie Rashbaum, played trumpet, something David would also do, along with violin, viola, and clarinet. As for piano, he started playing at age 7, part of a group called Transition. We met in high school, and our love for music brought us together. In my case, as the money we were paid for playing in the nearby venues was not much, I had to make a living as I could, sometimes as a waiter, sometimes as a shoe store clerk. But I didn't care because I was focused on my band and our gigs. Do you know who used to join me in the band at some of the shows we played in New Jersey? The boss, Bruce Springsteen. Bruce is a master, but don't think that he overshadowed me. Not at all. By that time, I already had a strong presence as a frontman. My energy and commitment stood out and attracted all eyes. I will tell you an anecdote of that time. It was 1979. I was driving through New Jersey when I saw a motorcycle speeding by. I decided to race it with my car, a Chevrolet Camaro. What I didn't know at the time was that it was a police motorcycle that was accompanying a car that was transporting a prisoner. The policeman stopped me and pointed a gun at me. Luckily, I explained what happened, and it all ended with the cops going to see my concert that night. Chapter 2. Runaway, the song that spawned Bon Jovi. In 1978, at the age of 17, my friend David Bryan was accepted into a music school in New York, the Juilliard School of Music. I thought it was a great chance for me to go to New York with him to continue pursuing my dream in music. My parents agreed, so we both moved to the Big Apple. By then, we had already left our band, Atlantic City Expressway, and I had started playing with another band called The Rest, although when I moved to New York, I left it too. While David was studying, I was working cleaning, serving coffee and various other things at my cousin Tony Bongiovi's recording studio, Power Station. There I would meet many stars, including Steve Tyler, the lead singer of Aerosmith, whose friendship I retain to this day. I earned $50 a week, which is not much, but I didn't care because I learned a lot there. My cousin let me use the studio to record my own demos when it wasn't being used, that is, first thing in the morning. Working there also allowed me to make little cameos in some songs, like the time I played palms on a Little Steven song, or in 1980 when a Star Wars Christmas album was being recorded, the Star Wars Christmas album, where I sang on the song R2-D2, We Wish You a Merry Christmas. That would be my first professional recording on which my name, Jon Bon Jovi, appeared.
And if the snow becomes too deep, just give a little beat. We'll go in by the fire.
I started writing my own songs. It hit me so hard that I would even write verses on my bedroom walls when inspiration struck. When I had a few, I wanted to try them out live, so I put together a very short-lived band with constantly changing members called the Lechers. After that, I formed another one which I called Jon Bon Jovi and the Wild Ones, where my childhood friend Dave Sabo also played. Of course, on keyboards I had David Bryan. In 1981, when I was 19 years old, I composed the song, which without knowing it, was to become the beginning of everything. Its name, Runaway. It was a song that reflected teenage angst through the story of a girl running away from home, tempted by the lights of Broadway and in search of love. It wasn't anything particularly deep, but it had a very catchy chorus. I had a lot of faith in that song, so I started moving it around to various record companies. Can you guess what happened? Well, they didn't pay the slightest attention to me. I had a lot of faith in that song, so I started moving it around to various record companies. Can you guess what happened? Well, they didn't pay the slightest attention to me, but I didn't give up. I couldn't imagine anything else but dedicating my life to music, and for that, I had to get signed by a record label. In 1983, I found myself at the local radio station 103.5 FM in New York.
New York's newest FM, rockin' the summer.
I had been hired to write jingles for the station. There I met DJ Chip Hobart and the promotion director, John Lassman. Of course, as I did with everyone, I showed them Runaway. They were so impressed that they offered to include it on a compilation album of local talent that the station was putting out. What I wanted was to make an album of my own, so I turned down the offer and went to Los Angeles, where I continued to visit record labels to no avail. While I was there, the owner of the radio station called me and insisted that I let them include the song on their album, so I finally agreed and gave them the song. Before that, I recorded it again with a series of studio musicians whom I called the All-Star Review. Among them was bassist Hugh McDonald, a future member of Bon Jovi. Runaway began to get radio play, first in the New York area, then across the rest of the country through other sister stations. This led to several music companies taking notice. After being tempted by several labels, I, John Bon Jovi, would sign my first record deal with Mercury Records on July 1st, 1983. I knew I needed a band to play my songs. The good thing is that thanks to the contract, I had enough money to hire good musicians, and above all, musicians committed to my project. The first person I called was my friend and keyboard player, Bryan. When I told him that I had a contract and was putting together a band, Bryan left his studies and joined me. Bryan then decided to contact a bass player he knew named Alec John Such. Born on November 14, 1951, Alexander John Such began his musical career in the New Jersey group Phantom's Opera, where he had drummer Tico Torres as his partner. In the 80s, he had also played in a hard rock band called Message with guitarist Richie Sambora. Thanks to Alec, half of Bon Jovi was formed. Alec and I also knew each other because he had hired me to play at a club in New Jersey where he worked as manager when I was with John Bon Jovi and the Wild Ones. Alec agreed to join the band and recommended me to talk to Tico Torres. Tico Torres, whose full name is Hector Juan Samuel Torres, was born on October 7, 1953 in New York City and grew up in New Jersey. His parents, Emma and Hector, emigrated from Cuba. As a young man, he was fond of jazz and studied music with Joe Morello. Although his first band would be psychedelic rock, 6 Feet Under, Torres already had a great background. He had played live with Joe Ceresano's R Band on the New Jersey rock circuit, and as a studio musician, he had played on 26 albums by artists such as Chuck Berry, Cher, Alice Cooper, and Stevie Nicks. He was even one of the drummers Kiss selected in 1980, as well as being the original drummer for the glam rock band T-Roth and Another Pretty Face, and playing on their 1980 album Face Facts. Tico was the perfect drummer for Bon Jovi, so it was a great joy when he said yes, even though personally he was not going through his best moment since he was divorcing his first wife, Sharon. Chapter 3. Richie Sambora, the missing piece for Bon Jovi. We were missing a guitarist. While we were looking for one, I called my friend and neighbor, Dave the Snake Sabo. Dave and I had a pact since we were kids. If one of us got to record an album, he would help the other. We both knew that his stint in the band was temporary, and in fact, I only hired him to play during the brief tour in support of Runaway. He never officially joined Bon Jovi. The band that Dave Sabo would later join was Skid Row. On the recommendation of bassist Alec Such, a guitarist named Richie Sambora came to see one of our shows. Richie was impressed with my strength and talent. At the end of the gig, he came up to me and said, "We should play together." And so we would. Richard Stephen Sambora was born on July 11, 1959 in New Jersey. The son of Joan, a secretary, and Adam C. Sambora, a factory foreman, Richie spent his teenage years playing on the high school basketball team with which he would win a state title in 1975. Musically, he began playing accordion at age 6, but switched to guitar at 12, influenced by the death of Jimi Hendrix. Richie also plays other instruments, such as drums, bass, saxophone, and piano. The first time he performed on stage was at a Catholic youth organization dance as a teenager. Richie Sambora had plenty of experience, having toured with Joe Cocker, played with a band called Mercy, and auditioned for Kiss. He also played with the band Message, where he met our bass player Alec Such. Richie was really good. He wasn't just an Eddie Van Halen impersonator like most guitar players at that time, so I took him up on it and he joined Bon Jovi. That same night of the concert, Richie and I continued our conversation at my mother's house. Right there, we would write our first 2 songs together, Come Back and Burning for Love. Both would become part of Bon Jovi's debut album. That is how the first official Bon Jovi lineup would emerge, with 5 founding members: Richie Sambora, Alec, David Bryan, Tico, Torres, and of course me, John Bon Jovi.
Yahoo!
As I was saying, the only one who signed the record contract was me. The rest of the band were my employees, and although it may surprise you, that's the way it would stay for the rest of our career. That never caused any conflict between us. By the way, even though the band was formed, we still didn't have a name. It would be Pamela Maher, an employee of our manager, Doc McGee, who would suggest that we call ourselves Bon Jovi, following the example of other famous bands of the time, whose name only had 2 words like Van Halen, quite a bit better than our original idea, Johnny Electric. Our first big gig was opening for ZZ Top at Madison Square Garden in New York. It happened before the album was released in January 1984 under our own name, Bon Jovi. We recorded it at my cousin's studios where I had worked for so long, Power Station. Of course, the album included Runaway, which, like the album, reached number 40 in the charts. Incidentally, it is the only album in our career to include a song not written by us, She Don't Know Me. We started opening for Scorpions in the US and Kiss in Europe, and I must confess that we weren't very good at that time. The third album would be our turning point. We played in all the clubs we could to make ourselves known, turning small audiences into fans, because Tico really knew how to keep the beat, and I didn't sing badly for being 22 years old and not knowing much about vocal composition. I remember that our manager, Doc McGee, suggested us to try the European and Japanese markets. We didn't think twice and off we went, achieving in our early days more success abroad than in the United States. We spent 9 months on tour, which caused the relationships we all had to break up or become complicated. In my case, I had been dating my high school sweetheart for 4 years and we broke up, although it would not be for long. We were made for each other.
I love you, sugar.
Her name was Dorothea Hurley, and she was the coolest girl in high school. I couldn't stop looking at her, but she had a boyfriend, a guy named Bobby. He went to do his military service one summer, and Dorothea and I started to spend a lot of time together. We listened to music. We went for car rides. What can I say? Soon we became boyfriend and girlfriend. Despite those early complications in the early days of Bon Jovi, we soon got back together. Love always wins.
I love you.
Chapter 4. From the disappearance to the worldwide success of Livin on a Prayer. In 1985, we released Bon Jovi's second album, 7,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The title refers to the supposed melting point of a rock, which is equivalent to 4,313 degrees. We wanted to express that we were playing very hot rock, although of course nobody knew that fact about the melting temperature of rocks, so just a few people understood it.
No.
On the album cover, we started using what would become the classic Bon Jovi logo of the 80s, with a diamond separating the 2 words Bon and Jovi. We released 3 singles, Only Lonely, In and Although the album was certified gold, its sales were much lower than expected. I must admit that I didn't like the album at all. It happened to us the same thing that happens to a lot of bands. They have a lifetime to write the songs for the first album, but for the second album, everything comes rushing in. We had to record 7,800 degree Fahrenheit in only 6 weeks, and what's more, with a producer we didn't fit in with at all, Lance Quinn. To make matters worse, we were all going through difficult times on a personal level. It all came together, and the result was what it was. In fact, we rarely played any song from this album in concert, except In and Out of Love. Of course, we went on tour again to present it, starting in Japan, the country where we were most successful, quite influenced by my long hair and general appeal to the Japanese public. We wanted to give them a nod on the album with the song Tokyo Road. In the US and Europe, we were still opening for other bands like Rat. One of the biggest gigs of that time was at the farmers' benefit called Farm Aid in 1985. The truth is that Bon Jovi as a band had everything: a great live show, an attractive look, and I sang very well. We only needed to find the right song. 7,800 Degrees Fahrenheit is our only album to include songs written by all the band members, Secret Dreams being the only song in which drummer Tico Torres appears as the author. After 2 moderately successful albums, we knew that if the third one didn't make it, the label would fire us. So we decided to change our approach to songwriting and recording. We hired a professional songwriter to help Richie and me, his name, Desmond Child, who would be with us for most of the rest of our career. To record, we moved to Canada for 6 months. The result, Slippery When Wet, released in 1986. The title is a message we saw in a Vancouver strip club, although the official story is that it's a sign we saw on a road. We leave it up to your interpretation.
Oh my goodness.
For the album cover, we had a fantastic image of a sexy girl with a torn t-shirt with the title Slippery When Wet. But to avoid controversy or it being interpreted as a sexist message, we changed it finally to the one you know, a wet glass with the title. Released in 1986 when I was 24 and Richie Sambora was 26, Slippery When Wet stayed 8 weeks at the top of the Billboard chart, thanks to 2 singles that are considered true rock gems. The first, You Give Love a Bad Name, in which we talk about that bad girl who just uses you and doesn't love you. During the 80s, I was romantically linked to actress Diane Lane. This song is dedicated to her. The funny thing is that Diane Lane fell in love with Richie Sambora. The second hit was Wanted Dead or Alive, where I compare myself to that cowboy who goes from town to town looking for a living, in my case as a rocker. But the song that really changed everything for us was Livin on a Prayer. Without a doubt, Bon Jovi's most iconic song. The track keeps on repeating on the charts around the world decade after decade. It was the first song where we incorporated that famous sound that Richie Sambora makes on some of our tracks called talkbox.
A talkbox is a sound effect device that allows you to modify the sound that a musical instrument has. This effect can be used to change the frequency of the sound and to apply vocal sounds to a musical instrument.
With over 3 million digital downloads, it already has over 1 billion views on YouTube. At first, I was reluctant to include Livin on a Prayer on the album. I didn't think it was good enough. Thank goodness Richie Sambora convinced me it would be a hit, but we did record it a second time before releasing it to polish up the details, and it did turn out great. Livin' on a Prayer depicts 2 characters, Tommy and Gina, a working-class couple struggling to make ends meet. Tommy loses his job as a longshoreman due to a strike, while Gina works as a waitress in a restaurant. The plot is based on true events that Iron songwriter Desmond Child experienced in the 1970s. Before he became a successful songwriter, Desmond Child and his then-girlfriend, singer-songwriter Maria Vidal, were living together. They had already started their music careers, but they had day jobs. Desmond was a cab driver in New York, while Maria Vidal worked as a waitress in a diner, just as Gina does in the song. The owner and employees of the diner called Maria Vidal Gina because of her slight physical resemblance to Italian actress Gina Lollobrigida, hence the name of our Gina. To me, the song represents the working class and is very real. Thanks to all these songs, Slippery When Wet was the best-selling album of 1987. We won Favorite Pop Rock Band at the American Music Awards and Favorite Rock Group at the People's Choice Awards. The album ranks 44th on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list of the 200 definitive albums of all time. To give you an idea of what a change it was for us when the album was released, we were not yet headlining. We were still opening for bands like 38 Special in the US. However, by the end of the year, we had played over 130 shows as the headlining band on the tour Without End, grossing $28 million. This allowed us to buy a private jet to travel. We couldn't believe it. The leap to worldwide fame made everything bigger, starting our life to move twice as fast. I was recognized everywhere. I also had the responsibility to sell more records, in other words, handle a much bigger business. Also, despite all the success, I was hurt because on many occasions our looks, and in particular mine, attracted more attention than our music. When I starred on my first Rolling Stone cover in 1987, people talked more about my hairstyle than anything else. Fortunately, over the years this would change, and I, Jon Bon Jovi, and the whole band would gain a lot of musical recognition. Of course, the posters in the bedrooms of many young people would remain for a long time. Chapter 5. The End of Bon Jovi. We released our fourth album, New Jersey, in 1988, again reaching #1 in the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, New Zealand, and Australia. The album scored 5 top 10 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, giving Bon Jovi the record for most top 10 singles from a hard rock album. These were Bad Medicine, which many consider the second part of You Give Love a Bad Name, because it also talks about bad girls. The second hit would be the beautiful ballad, I'll Be There For You.
I'll be there for you. These 5 words I swear to you. When you breathe, I wanna be the air for you. I'll be there for you. I live and I die for you. Steal the sun from the sky for you. Words can't say what love can do.
Another one of our most iconic songs, and one that speaks of being predestined, born to be my baby. A support song like few others, Lay Your Hands on Me, and finally another song that unleashes passions, Living in Sin, although the video was banned by MTV for its sexual content. New Jersey was undoubtedly our favorite album so far. We went on a huge world tour visiting 22 countries, giving more than 232 concerts. As part of that tour, in August 1989, we traveled to the Soviet Union to participate in the Moscow Music Peace Festival. We were the first American band officially sanctioned by the Soviet government to perform in the country, and our album New Jersey became the first American album to be legally released in the USSR. In between all that, in 1988, I would make my first appearance in a movie, The Return of Bruno. But much more importantly, on a tour stop in Los Angeles, I took a secret trip to Las Vegas with my high school sweetheart, Dorothea Hurley, and we got married. It was on April 29, 1989, at the Graceland Wedding Chapel, which still has a sign saying that Jon Bon Jovi was married there. Dorothea and I would go on to have 4 children: Stephanie Rose Bongiovi in 1993, Jesse James Louis Bongiovi 2 years later in 1995, Jacob Hurley Bongiovi in 2002, and our 4th and final child in 2004, Romeo John Bongiovi. After 2 consecutive world tours, the exhaustion of recording 2 albums in a row, and almost 7 years without a break, all of us in the band were exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally. In fact, during the last tour, I had such exhausted vocal cords that I had to inject steroids on several occasions to be able to sing. More than exhausted, I would say we were burnt out. After the last date of the tour in Mexico in February 1990, and with no clear plan for its future, the 5 members of the band left for home, with no set return date. Our guitarist, Richie Sambora, took the opportunity to record his first solo album, Stranger in This Town, in which Tico, Torres and David Bryan also collaborate. Our keyboardist, David Bryan, recorded the soundtrack for the horror movie The Netherworld. That after being hospitalized for an illness caused by a South American parasite from which it took him some time to recover. David would also take advantage of the hiatus to get married in 1990 with his high school sweetheart, April McLean, with whom he would have 3 children. The bass player, Alec John Such, fell off his motorcycle, injuring the hand with which he played the bass. This forced him to develop a whole new way of holding and playing his instrument. As for me, I, Jon Bon Jovi, would also record my first solo album in 1990, the soundtrack to the movie Young Guns 2, better known as Blaze of Glory. Initially, they asked me to lend them Wanted Dead or Alive as the main theme for the movie, but I ended up composing a completely new song and recording that first solo album. By the way, I had some great guests on the album like Elton John, Little Richard, and Jeff Beck. The title track, Blaze of Glory, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, won the award for Favorite Pop Rock Single at the American Music Awards, and was awarded a Golden Globe. It even earned me an Oscar nomination and a Grammy nomination. Even though Bon Jovi hadn't officially broken up, I didn't have my bandmates to share the success with, and I missed it. It was a very grey period for me. I was depressed, going to therapy. To get out of that negative loop, my wife Dorothea came up with the idea that we would go on a motorcycle trip across the country on the famous Route 66. That time would help me to think a lot and decide what I was going to do.
Bon Jovi was at a crossroads. The record company was pressuring them to always be on tour, which left them exhausted. John, Richie, Tico, David, and Bryan had a lot of personal friction due to the pressure and the continuous work. Would this be the end of Bon Jovi? What would Jon Bon Jovi do to avoid his dream of being a rock star slipping away? And the rest of the members, would they continue to accept that Bon Jovi was a business and they were the employees? If they continued, would they be able to hook up with the new generations? All this and much more in the fascinating second part of the Bon Jovi story. This podcast is dedicated to you, the Bon Jovi fans. We hope you enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much and see you next time, Trembol. We love you.